Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Thanks for joining us. On behalf of Positive Luxury, I'm pleased to host today's session, Global Fashion Summit, Key Learnings for Sustainable Luxury. I'm Jennifer Revell, Client Success Manager at Positive Luxury, and I'll host the session in conversation with my colleague Charlotte here. She's Senior Manager of Growth and Client Success.
Thanks, Jen.
So
I'm delighted to be here, and it was a great event this year and so many gold nuggets I look forward to sharing with the audience.
wonderful. So for those of you who don't know Positive Luxury, we help over 200 clients navigate the forces reshaping luxury to sell more, justify price points, and stand apart from the competition with people, planet, and business front of mind. Today, we're going to unpack the key learnings from the Global Fashion Summit in Copenhagen, and importantly, what they mean for your business right now. Luxury has always stood for craftsmanship, rarity, and exclusivity, but today it must also stand for accountability and evidence. And that was one of the clearest signals from this year's summit. There's been a major shift happening in the industry. Sustainability is no longer just about responsibility, it's about performance, resilience, and long term value creation. So at Positive Luxury, we really focus on proof over promise. So here's a short video, which is just a snapshot about who we are and what we do. So, this year's summit in Copenhagen marked a clear turning point. The conversation has shifted from ambition to resilience, and this year's theme was building resilient futures. Luxury brands are now operating in a much more complex environment. Rising costs across supply chains, challenging scaling next generation materials, and increasingly active regulatory landscape. And at the same time, expectations for credible, demonstrable impact have never been higher. So today we're going to share some insights from thought leaders at the summit and translate those into inspiration and actions for you. We'll be breaking our conversation into three key themes we saw across the summit. These are building resilient business models, scaling circularity, materials, cost, and innovation, accountability, transparency, and trust. And then we'll have time for a Q&A. So please put your questions in the chat. So let's begin with outlining some of the snapshots that we noticed this year before jumping into our panel themes. So for this, I'll hand over to Charlotte to give a snapshot of the event.
Thanks so much, Jenny. So just to give an overview of the Global Fashion Summit this year, for those who don't know, the purpose of the summit is to bring together leaders across fashion, luxury, policy, innovation, investment, and civil society to really accelerate systemic change towards a more sustainable and resilient fashion industry. And it opened in a really inspiring way. So we wanted to just give you a little taste of what the event was like. So the opening remarks by the Chief Executive Officer of Global Fashion Agenda, Federica Marchioni, they painted a picture of the reality that the global fashion industry is facing now. real effects of climate and geopolitical shifts, challenging supply chains, AI displacing human labor, and lack of visibility upstream, to name a few. But still, she emphasized this really motivating idea that all sustainability leaders need to hear, which is the belief in progress over perfection. And it's really a call to act now and a message that really resonates with us at Positive Luxury. We work to instill this across the industry. After the opening remarks, she brought on stage Helene Valade, who's the Director of Environmental Development at LVMH, and they're also a principal sponsor of the event. And she joined to introduce the new era of impact. She was wearing a fabulous denim bag and jacket made of regenerative cotton, which was funded by LVMH's environmental program. And you can kind of see it in the image here. And following their discussion, as part of their ESG strategy, LVMH uplift innovators in the sustainable fashion space through their Eco Chic Design Award. And their 2015 winner was Kevin Germanier. He was actually brought on stage. He's worked closely with LVMH after winning this award and has done many collections and surprised the audience with this show of an upcycled collection created from dead stock pieces from LVMH's maisons, including Berluti uniforms from the Paris 2024 Olympic and Paralympic Games. And this really shows the potential of creative circularity as a driver of innovation and desirability. And it set the tone for a positive, open-minded spirit of connection at the event, where thought leaders can pair long-term industry knowledge with more recent innovations and try to harness our energy towards solutions. And really, the event consisted of a number of talks and workshops, all focused on live solutions to industry challenges. Jenny and I had the pleasure of attending many talks and having great conversations with luxury leaders as well. And we look forward to sharing some of those insights with you now.
So thanks, Charles. So with that, let's begin the discussion. We'll explore the first theme we took away from this year's GFS, so building resilient business models. So my first question to you, Char, is what does a truly resilient value chain look like in a luxury fashion business, and what key elements make it resilient today?
Thanks for the question. So it's a big one. When I think about this question, it brought me to the talk with the CEO of Brunello Cucinelli, which is a great example of a luxury brand that's built a resilient supply chain and has still seen consistent growth for over 30 years while protecting people and ecosystems. So Riccardo Stefanelli, the CEO, he shared that the brand has always been rooted in this philosophy of humanistic capitalism, and that then shapes the product. And so human dignity is at the center of every business decision that they make. They don't try to, he said that they don't try to deliver high profit, then give back after, but rather deliver a fair profit because your supply chain had fair remuneration all along. And this is really pertinent now, being an Italian luxury brand and kind of what's been happening in more recent times. And really, it's about also paying attention to the community that shaped who you are as a company. And they are in this very specific region of Italy. And so they play a really influential role in that local community as well. He also gave a really interesting story about the challenge of the pandemic, which was the first year where they actually had to report a drop in profit. And they decided in that time not to lay people off, not to avoid paying suppliers. And they actually donated any extra product to people in need, which is a short-term trade-off. However, they were keeping that ultimate long-term vision in mind for the company and bringing it back to this humanistic capitalism. And then the other thing I wanted to kind of share about Brunello Cucinelli is this amazing Himalayan regenerative fashion living lab. So this is a regenerative sourcing and community resilience project that they've developed actually alongside King Charles III's Sustainable Markets Initiative, SMI, and the Circular Bioeconomy Alliance. But it's all about supporting semi-nomadic communities in Ladakh, India. He alluded to it in the talk, and it's a really interesting initiative because there's traditional Kashmir craftsmanship in this region that is kind of under threat, that could, go away over time if it's not invested into. And it's also a crucial material for the brand. So this investment makes a lot of sense for their brand and the storytelling, and it reframes sustainability into long-term protection of ecosystems and artisanal value chains. So I know I'm only talking about one brand as an example, but I think it really encompasses the main answer, which is that resilient supply chains are driven by striving for protection of people at all stages of the chain.
Thanks, Ty. I think that that's so true. Kind of looking at communities across your supply chain and looking after them is key to building a resilient business. And what I loved about their business is I think he said that he was working with the same suppliers for over 34 years, which just shows kind of they're as much part of the brand as anything else. And kind of those long-term partnerships are really where you build trust and can make a difference. So yeah, I think that's a great example to use as for that question. So my second question for you is how should executives prioritize resilience investments in the current cost environment? There are a lot of kind of other urgent priorities. So yeah, how can we help businesses think about that?
Yes, so the message kind of carried throughout the event was really that investment into resilience and sustainability is not optional, which is doesn't directly answer the question of how to prioritize, but I just wanted to bring back that main message really. And Hélène Valade of LVMH opened the entire event by saying, they are staying the course and really re-emphasizing that sustainability and business are the same battle, and that's a direct quote. So, LVMH has a very large value chain, very high commitments, and they're staying the course of their Life 360 strategy, which includes actual targets around circular design, renewable energy, biodiversity restoration, and this comes back to the idea that these ecosystems and nature and these luxury quality materials underpin the very existence of their product. So investing in the resilience of those materials is fundamental to being able to produce well into the future. Um, they're also involved in this regenerative agriculture partnerships for their key raw materials to kind of illustrate this point. And also traceability systems and supplier mapping deeper into their value chain. So this is a really actionable takeaway, especially around raw materials and nature-related risk. And in 2025, they contributed to preserving or restoring 4.3 million hectares of terrestrial ecosystems. Um, the other thing I wanted to note, tying back to prioritizing resilience investments, AI is a topic that's unavoidable, and it's really can be an opportunity to future proof. Federica Marchioni, in her opening remarks, said that urged us to use AI responsibly as it's displacing people unfairly, particularly upstream. And the positive side of this is AI can be harnessed for resilience in many ways, from AI-enabled supply chain mapping beyond tier one, predictive risk monitoring for sourcing disruption, material traceability analysis, waste reduction through design optimization, which we'll touch on a little bit later, supplier due diligence, fiber identification. So there's some really exciting things happening in this space that tie into that fashion supply chain resilience. And I think this is an exciting opportunity for luxury brands to be investing in now. And just one example I'll give of one of these is Trust Trace. which uses AI-supported data analysis to validate supply chain information, track material origins, and support compliance reporting. And they work with brands like Adidas and PVH as one example. So I could go on and on about that, but really my 2 points are investing in the materials that are crucial to your product, understanding nature-related dependencies, and then looking to how AI can improve efficiency without displacing people.
Thanks, Charlotte. I think, both of those points also look to kind of thinking about investments as long-term security of your business rather than trading off for, short-term needs. It's
Mm-hmm.
challenging to do in an unstable economic climate, but you'll definitely benefit from that kind of later thinking, that long-term vision, and keeping that front of mind. So,
Exactly.
as a final question for this theme, where are you seeing the biggest gaps between ambition and execution in regard to sustainability goals?
So at this point, the industry is really confronting the gap between this ambition and the operational reality. And 2026 feels like a reflection point for fashion brands. Many companies are asking themselves, did we actually achieve our 2025 targets? Are we realistically on track for 2030? And if not, what do we need to accelerate or rethink on our strategy? One clear gap, which we're going to get into, is circularity. Almost every major fashion brand now has ambitions around resale, repair, recycled fibers, and circular design, but the infrastructure to scale still isn't fully there yet. So that's one. Another is that visibility in the supply chain beyond tier one that brands are working on. Brands have made commitments or maybe need to report. However, the traceability is not there yet, and reliable data is perhaps not there yet either. We're seeing tension as well, as we were just talking about, between long-term sustainability targets and the short-term commercial pressures with everything happening right now. Um, Brands are trying to balance growth expectations while still trying to reduce emissions, improve sourcing, and these don't always structurally align. And then there's finally the execution challenge around collaboration. This event is all about collaboration, and a lot of the solutions that were discussed, whether it's regenerative agriculture, textile recycling, traceability, it requires collective investment to move forward. And a lot of historically in fashion, it's competitive and perhaps brands operate in silos. So this resilience infrastructure can't be built in isolation. And from our perspective at Positive Luxury, this creates a really big opportunity for us to help brands refocus on what's materially important for them.
Thank you. There was definitely that sense of collaboration at the event. So I'm glad you touched on that, because it was definitely a really positive feeling, and it felt like brands, certainly weren't in competition in the mindset towards kind of having to move forward in these spaces. So with that, we'll move on to our next theme, which Charlotte is leading. So I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Jen. So the next theme that we just sort of touched on is scaling circularity, materials, cost, and innovation. At the summit, the conversation clearly has shifted from what's possible to what's now scalable. And it was really exciting to see the innovative solutions exhibited. But a key challenge did keep coming up, which is, how do we scale this? We need to craft one vision around circularity and collaborate as an industry in a focused way to create the infrastructure that we need to make this functional in the market. So let's move to the first question for you, Jenny, which is, what challenges do brands face when trying to scale circularity in the fashion value chain?
Thank you. So as you mentioned earlier, kind of almost every major fashion player now talks about circularity, resale, repair, recycled fibers, or textile to textile recycling. But the physical infrastructure to make this work at scale just still barely exists. So Helena Helmerson, who is the former head of sustainability at H&M, and she's now a board member for Mango and Circular. She put it really well at the summit. She said circularity isn't challenging because we don't know how to do it. It's because economics still favor virgin materials. Nature is free, so there's no direct incentives to invest in circularity. And this just isn't the right way to be looking at it. So I would say scalability is the biggest challenge that circularity faces right now. Circular systems are still lacking in that infrastructure to be really successful. And it is collaboration that is needed to kind of drive, just focus on fewer, stronger circularity solutions. And then it can grow to be a bit more functional and enter the mainstream market. And another key challenge, which is kind of caused by that first challenge, is there are so many great solutions, but the message is diluted because there are so many great solutions. So that causes friction with the consumer, and it kind of, to make something successful with consumers, it's got to be convenient. As we know, kind of we all probably live our own lives that way. So that focus on, fewer pieces and infrastructure building, that's going to cause it to go mainstream, and then the messaging to consumers can be clear as well, because they'll have that kind of mainstream way of doing it, and it will just be our new fashion system.
Absolutely. Consumers are a key part of that circular system. And with so many different messages and so many different repair resale programs, it can be confusing. And that can be another barrier that maybe brands don't always think about. So on to the next question then. How should brands prioritize investment in circular solutions?
Yeah, so there's some really exciting things that we saw at GFS, and I think resale was a really key theme here. We saw lots of really successful examples of this. I mean, kind of outside the summit, Vinted is now approaching 1 billion in annual revenue. So the commercial case for resale circularity really speaks for itself. And at the summit, general manager of eBay, Kirsty Kogan, was on the panel for Can Future Markets Create Circular Systems? And as a resale business that has been operating for over 31 years and generating over 9 billion in revenue per year, it recently announced plans to acquire Depop as well. So this shows that there is that long-term value in circularity. And Kirsty also said that fashion is naturally cyclical, with trends coming back around over and over. Like 90s minimalism is really in right now. It only makes sense that the system that it operates in would also be circular. So with such success in the resale market, it would make sense for brands to kind of want to internalize this, with resale platforms within brand growing in popularity. So recognizing that circularity is an opportunity to show product value to your customer is really key. Mulberry CEO Andrea Baldo shared that in order to protect the luxury value proposition, the relationship with the consumer needs to be long-term rather than just transactional. And circularity is one of the clear ways of doing that, to show that long-term value of your product and showing that it can be worn, used, repaired, broken down, rebuilt again and again. So Mulberry have a pretty comprehensive repair program. They work with a thermal energy plant using an innovative take-back scheme that converts end-of-life leather into fuel. So they minimize leather offcuts and work with Scrap Store to supply waste materials to local schools and universities and craft groups as well. So they've replaced all virgin nylon with Econyle, durable and lightweight regenerated nylon crafted from fishing nets and other salvaged waste. So they really communicate about this progress clearly, transparently, backed by real action, and collaborate with inspiring social media influencers who really champion more sustainable purchasing habits too. So it's kind of a multiple pronged approach. And then kind of another key message is don't compete, but collaborate. So fashion brands can't compete their way into circularity infrastructure. As we said, it's kind of really everybody coming to that one focus. So co-investing in these solutions. Helena Helmersson again urged fashion executives to collaborate in a focused way, using all levers, including capital, policies, and infrastructure. And her career story is actually a real testament to this. So Circulose nearly collapsed after failing to secure enough kind of long-term demand, despite having really strong technology. And one of the biggest lessons from that failure was innovation alone is not enough. Brands need to commit commercially and collaboratively for infrastructure to really survive. So now, under the company's reboot, brands including H&M Group and Mango have signed multi-year agreements with Circulose to help create stable demand for recycled textile feedstocks.
I think that's a really interesting example as well because, Mango and H&M are fast, almost they're high street fashion brands, and yet they even see the opportunity when it comes to circular materials and future proofing their value chains. So I think there are so many different groups that brands can get involved with to scale circular solutions. And we're happy to kind of share those if you're interested after the webinar as well for any brands listening. Last question for you, Jenny, on this topic. What were some of the most exciting, innovative solutions that you saw around circularity at the event?
That's a really good question. So at the event, there's an innovation hub. So it showcases solutions which don't have scale yet. And we'll touch on a few for you. So there's Synflux. They're a Japanese design tech company. They're using AI-powered pattern engineering to really reduce fabric waste during garment production. So it tackles waste prevention at the design stage, which is one of the highest impact circular interventions you can have at fashion. Then there was Bloom Labs. So they're a textile recycling innovator focused on converting protein-based waste fibers like wool and silk into new performance materials. So this is potentially very interesting for luxury knitwear, tailoring, and heritage brands that work with wool, silk, or cashmere, because natural fiber recycling is still quite underdeveloped. So compared to kind of synthetics. So this addresses that real gap in circular infrastructure, and it extends the life and recoverability of those premium natural fibers. We also spoke to some really exciting biotech companies, so expanding possibilities for rare and traditionally unethical materials like silk. So we spoke with AM Silk, who make a variety of biomaterial fibers. One really exciting one was lab-grown silk yarn. And then Linera makes cell-based skins to replace luxury leathers so they can replicate crocodile and other red leathers. So a lot of innovation happening there. And, there's not a lack of ideas and inspiration. It's really amazing what these businesses are doing. So I think kind of focusing on scaling those could be a really exciting opportunity for luxury brands.
Absolutely. And I also saw that Synflux, the Japanese design tech company, they actually won the Trailblazer Award at GFS. So congrats to them. And I think it really speaks to the fact that fashion offcuts in the manufacturing process are a huge, huge waste problem. So a great solution that hopefully can scale. So we're going to move to the final section. So I'll hand it back over to you, Jenny.
Thanks, Charles. So on to, yeah, our final theme, and arguably the most critical, is accountability. So at Positive Luxury, we recognize that transparency is essential to building trust with the luxury consumer and brand equity over time. It's not about being perfect, it's about showing measurable progress that's backed by data and evidence. Because today, trust is kind of the new currency of luxury. And it's really earned through verification, data, and clear, confident communication. And we're also seeing transparency move upstream into your operation. So from digital passports to supply chain transparency, brands are really expected to kind of know where their materials are coming from and understand their impacts and then communicate that with clarity. But brands, who aren't doing that, they do risk falling behind, and, not just reputationally, I think, as we said throughout this conversation, falling behind commercially as well. So my first question to you, Char, is what does credible transparency actually look like in practice today?
Thank you. So you did a great job of sort of top line summing it up, but really it's backed by in-depth data and infrastructure and real action. It's still a work in progress, but we're striving for a future where transparency is a given and it's not just leading brands that are transparent. One major evolution in 2026, of course, increasingly includes traceability infrastructure and digital product passports, as well as supplier disclosure, those repair and resale systems, methodology transparency, third party verification, lifecycle data, and governance integration. So it's no longer broad mission statements or eco claims. It is getting into the data and sharing that with consumers and bringing them into the journey. We thought that Reformation actually is really a great example of a brand leading incredible transparency. And we heard Kathleen Talbot speak on one of the panels at the event. Um, they've embedded impact measurement directly into the customer experience and into their marketing. Their product pages on their website quantify water savings, carbon impacts, and material choices at item level through their own sort of ref scale methodology. And they build trust and credibility by publicly discussing where data quality is still evolving rather than presenting sustainability as solved. And this is the key to progress over perfection. They share their methodology and the limitations, not just the outcomes, not just how many trees were planted or XYZ, but how did we arrive at this point? And they tie sustainability into sourcing, into dead stock usage, fiber choice, and resale. And they take the public on tours in their LA factory, which I think is really interesting. That's a physical manifestation of being transparent and bringing customers in behind the scenes. They also have shared that they offer their factory staff biweekly ESL classes. They give a Path to Citizenship course. They have a masseuse, which is pictured here, fresh organic produce. The list goes on. So they try to take care of their staff and they share that information publicly, which holds them accountable to those claims as well. And then the other thing I wanted to reference is On, which I think is another really interesting case study of somewhat radical transparency around circularity and around sustainability. They have the Cyclone model that they've implemented, and it's a subscription-based circular system where customers lease the product, return worn shoes, and then the materials are chemically recycled into future products. Um, and they've been really honest that the infrastructure is still evolving and that recycling at scale remains difficult. They've committed to take action and to try their best, but they're acknowledging the systemic challenges that they might be facing and that they're not maybe going to be perfect, but they're going to try their best. And they've also allocated real capital and taken the bold step of trying to pioneer, but still remain open. So I think these are real good examples of kind of credible transparency in practice today.
Yeah, I think that's a really good message that take consumers along the journey of progress. Like, don't be afraid to be talking about these things that you're doing and, until they're perfect. I think, that's where innovation can come, is taking everyone on the journey and having that sense of collaboration. So these are, yeah, really great examples. And I love the phrase radical transparency. I think everyone
Yeah.
should be like that. So that's great.
Yeah, and
So
I would also add that I think it does this new kind of this expectation and move and shift towards being open. It does sift out those that really were investing and taking action from those that sort of weren't, because once you remove the silk screen and look behind the curtain, you can see who's taking action, and you have to have the data to back up your claims. So it's a really great opportunity to start, getting that DPP product data and et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's a great shift for the industry.
absolutely, absolutely. Well, on to the second question for this theme. What role does third-party verification play in building trust?
So I think what was really made clear at GFS is that credible transparency is a lot more than just disclosure. It's about that accountability, proving that sustainability is really embedded into the long-term decision making of the business instead of more of a reactive short-term campaign. And so, yeah, leading companies are increasingly recognizing that resilience requires that long-term operational investment, even if the returns are not immediate. And the business case for sustainability investment is becoming clear. Businesses that invest seriously in sustainability improved productivity by as much as 65%. That's a really clear link to the business case. And many of the strongest examples of progress now involve creating mandatory systems rather than relying purely on voluntary ambition, whether it's minimum wage frameworks, traceability requirements, third-party verification. The industry is moving towards structures that make consistency, accountability, and measurable progress. Um, and third-party certification and assessment frameworks can play an important role alongside technologies like DPPs to back up the claims that you're making. The other point that I wanted to make is that transparency isn't the same as credibility, and third party verification creates that independent accountability that consumers can trust. It creates defensibility around the claims that you're making, and it helps you translate complexity for consumers and for potential partners for your business. So it looks today less like polished sustainability storytelling and more like a willingness to show how decisions are governed, what challenges still exist, and whether the business isn't genuinely investing in long-term resilience rather than short-term optics.
Thanks, Chai. I think that differentiation between transparency and credibility is really helpful for businesses asking themselves these questions to kind of, it's a great place to start. So before we open up for questions, let's bring it back to what this means for you and what to do next. So firstly, kind of our key takeaway is resilience must be operationalized. So embedding sustainability into core business functions will future-proof your business, accelerate positive impact, and align your business strategy with planetary needs. And reframing sustainability and resilience as a commercial opportunity and business value rather than a cost will really ensure that your dependencies across nature and supply chains and building systems that can withstand disruption. Secondly, circularity requires collaboration. There's no shortage of ambition. The challenge is execution. What can scale, what delivers commercial return, and what can be measured and improved over time. Collaboration is really needed in the industry to collectively invest in circularity initiatives so that the infrastructure is marketable and becomes mainstream rather than a differentiator. This will bring more revenue for all, protect materials, make consumers more loyal, and protect our planet's needs as well. And then finally, credibility must be proven, not claimed. This is a really important shift. At Positive Luxury, as I said, we focus on proof over promise. Transparency is expected, verification is essential, and trust is earned through evidence. It's not about perfection, it's about demonstrating clear, measurable progress backed by data. And that proof is what enables brands to build that trust and justify the value of their product and stand out in a really crowded, competitive market. And the brands that will lead in the next decade of fashion are unlikely to be the ones that are making the loudest claims. It's the ones that are building the strongest systems. So, really resilient supply chains, credible governance, collaborative infrastructure, and measurable progress that stands up to scrutiny. The opportunity now is just to respond to change, but to help shape and what a resilient, circular, and trusted luxury industry looks like for the next generation. So kind of being the part of change rather than acting reactively. So with that, I'd love to open the discussion to take any of your questions. I'll just have a look in the Q&A and see if anything is there, and I'll just double check the chat as well. if anyone would like to send anything in. We did have a few questions sent previous to the webinar, which was what are some of the fashion companies that we work with at Positive Luxury? So to give you an overview, we work with some really exciting fashion brands, kind of larger size, as well as kind of more innovative, smaller brands. So we work with Me and M, Cecily Banson, who's based in Copenhagen near the summit. Extra, MCM, Veranda, Studio Tondini, Piper and Sky, We Are For, Cult Mia, and Modern Synthesis, just to name a few. And they are all doing kind of really different things within the systems that we've spoken about today. So yeah, we encourage you to kind of reach out if you do want to hear more about those brands and what they're doing. They're really willing to kind of share on the pieces that they've advanced on while working with us. And yeah, it's exciting to work with brands that have such an appetite to lead in this space as well. I think that's definitely what we can say about our community. And then I'll just have another look if anything else has come in. I hope that answered the question. Another question we do have is, does sustainability really matter to customers, and is it only young people that care about it? I think that's a really good question because I think there is that like action gap. Chad, do you want to maybe speak a bit more to that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a question that we get all the time, and of course, it's hard to quantify whether a purchase is tied to a product just based on the fact that it's marketed as sustainable. But there is data that backs that up. I think one really interesting stat is that over 70% of luxury consumers research online pre-purchase, and they're increasingly using AI for recommendations. So those that care about sustainability are going to be digging for that information online more and more. To the point about, is it only young people that care about sustainability? I think intuitively we know the answer is no. But one stat that I think really stands out is that 70% of millennials and 37% of silver surfers say that sustainability influences their luxury purchases. So, particularly for luxury, it is a direct correlation with purchase. And sustainability claims can also increase purchase intent by as much as 20%, which I think is a stat that we've all heard. But all things being equal between two products, sustainability is the tiebreaker for that purchasing decision. So customers do care about sustainability. Cost is the number one thing that they care about, especially in this economic environment. But I think in luxury in particular, sustainability backs up your value proposition about the quality of your product.
Yeah, and I think a great thing to remember as well is that if costs are what drives the consumer, sustainability is a great way to save on cost efficiencies and build the resilience of your business so you don't have larger costs along the line. So I think, yeah, really, really well put, Char. We do have just another one that came in just about the notes being generated from the webinar. We will share the recording of the webinar, and I'll see whether we can share a transcription as well and pass some kind of keynotes around, which will give a nice summary of what we've spoken about today. But wonderful. I think if we don't have any more questions, please do, if you think of something when you come off the call, please do reach out to one of us. I believe you have one of our emails, and there's also our general email that you can find on screen now. And yeah, thank you so much for joining today. And thank you, Charlotte, for such great discussion. It was such a pleasure to go to GFS, and looking forward to seeing how everybody takes these insights and kind of drives our mission forward. Have a
Thank you
great
so
day,
much.
everyone.
Take care, everybody.